Well, our client had a history in the monitoring of industrial filters, and these are filters that exist in industrial plants. Some people refer to them as bag houses. The monitors were all analog devices. If filters needed attention, these were monitors that would typically simply sound a local alarm. The biggest difference from that, these older devices were entirely local entities, whereas this new generation of devices are connected to a private cloud. They still monitor the performance of a filter, and they still provide information when maintenance is needed in a filter house or a bag house. The difference is when they have information to share, they're sharing the information to the private cloud of our clients' customer base. The information about the filter and the different sites of filters, and potentially the multiple plants that could even be in different addresses or different cities or even different countries, are all pulled together on a master control panel. That unlocks the next tier of capability for devices like that, turning them into local buzzers to potentially global sources of information and action.
The Internet of Things, they're connected devices, so that these devices, in particular the ones that we're manufacturing, they can go all around the world, and we can monitor them in real time wherever they are. That's the benefit of them being connected either cellularly or over the internet. And that's how our customer, frankly, utilizes the technology, by being able to continuously monitor any device, all devices, all the time, as opposed to having, 20, 30, 40 years ago, you would need a physical person to go monitor these devices, go check them live. And you can only do so much with that when it's one person checking devices, right? So you would check them on some periodic schedule, and that's all well and good. But the issue comes in if you check a device or a status on day one, and you're not due back until day 30, well, on day 15 something could go wrong, and you would have no idea what that is until you came back the next time. The Internet of Things allows all these devices to be continuously monitored at all times in real time, so that if there's an issue, it's known about right then and there and can be acted on much quicker.
I think, and I think for the IoT in general, all these devices, a lot of it's more consumer, high volume stuff. But with this customer, it's a little bit more complex. They're kind of assembling it into a bigger assembly that we also produce. So that kind of fits our wheelhouse better than, say, like IoT thermostats, where those are just built at a very high volume, which we can do, but is not necessarily in our wheelhouse. You're just monitoring the two pressures, your input and your output, behind each side of a filter. And with those measurements, you're able to tell if that filter needs to be replaced or not. So that's from the simple terms, that's really all it's doing. When it's combined into a panel, there are other options to actuate valves and do more testing.
A real simple way to think about it, it measures differential pressure across a filter. So if you imagine you've got this big HVAC system in a building, and it filters the air that's coming into or going out of the building. Well, over time, that filter is going to collect all sorts of dust and contaminants and things like that, and it's going to clog the filter over time. So what this device does is it measures differential pressure. So it measures pressure on one side of the filter, call it the outside, and then on the inside of the filter. Now, if it's a brand new filter, there's no contaminants in the way, so the air can go through cleanly, the differential pressure is going to be very low. As that filter clogs up, that differential pressure is going to get larger and larger. The difference in pressure is going to be lower inside the filter and higher outside the filter. So at some point there'll be a threshold where the monitoring system will say, "Hey, your filter is clogged with all kinds of stuff. You need to replace it." So that's the whole point of this differential pressure monitoring system. Is it looks for that differential pressure to be able to inform you when your filter is clogged, again, in real time. Our customer called us in because they had the device designed, they needed it manufactured in volume.
Okay.
So they had done all the design work to make this an autonomous process, because there were kind of two ways to handle it before this technology was around. You would either preemptively change your filters on some periodic maintenance schedule, which is fine, but you run the risk of increasing your cost because you're changing filters that may not necessarily need to be changed on such a short schedule. Or you would not change those filters, and you run the risk of damaging the filters or getting contaminated air inside or outside of the building. So what this does is it draws a line as to when that filter needs to be changed right then and there. It draws that threshold. So that is what our customer designed. They came to us to manufacture it in volume. Because if you can imagine, there are thousands of industrial buildings all over the country, all over the world, that have these filters that could utilize this technology. So it's a high volume device that our customer, who's a very small company, because they're designing the technology, but they don't have the means to manufacture it. That's where we came in. Yeah, and I think the biggest role that we had in the pre-manufacturing stage is the regulatory certification. That was the biggest piece of the puzzle. There was already a fair amount of DFM done. Obviously, the design was completed as well. So this market demands regulatory certification. So we helped our customers shepherd this product line through that process.
Yeah, I think this might be an opportunity to talk about the two different levels of regulatory certification. I think it naturally fits because none of it was in place when we were first putting together the relationship with the client. The first level of certification that was needed was at the level of particular devices. And so initially there was one device, it was a monitoring device, and it needed to carry a 61010 certification. When we approached the 61010 certification, we put forward a strategy with the regulatory body. The strategy was to, in the regulatory listing that would come from the certification activity, to describe all of the variants of this product that would ever be conceived, right? And so as a strategy, we didn't go to the regulatory body with just, let's say, the first version of the product. But for example, this product could be powered by AC, or it could be powered by DC, and it could have different types of inputs and outputs. And one of those inputs could be the differential pressure sensor that we've spoken about. But it could be powered in different ways. It could have different types of inputs and outputs. And we developed a system where all of those could be wrapped into the same regulatory body listing file. And that way, that listing file would be good and valid for all of the variations of this product. And what that did for the client is it enabled the client to be ready for all of those future applications without the time and expense of re-engaging the regulatory body. I spoke about two levels of certification, and so the product offerings of our client also developed to the point where multiple devices would be assembled onto a panel in an enclosure. what happens in that scenario is that now there are devices that get mounted on the panel, and the devices themselves need to carry certifications if that's even applicable. But now the question is, well, what is the certification of the overall panel? The answer to that overall certification is a UL 508A certification. With the UL 508A certification, the qualified manufacturer is asserting and marking that overall panel as something that's compliant, and that in turn permits the end user to receive an overall compliant device, right? So on day one, end users were receiving one device that had a certification. And where we are now is end users can receive a panel, and the whole panel and its devices have a certification as well. That's important to certain end users because certain end users have a requirement that panel have the certification. For example, if that panel does not have the certification, they can't use that panel at their site because they have an obligation primarily for safety to use certified panels, or that panel can't go into their product. And this is an example of how the two tiers of certification come together.
Yeah, I think, and it's interesting because before this customer client came in, we didn't have a 508A certification. And it's interesting because we do build a lot of point-to-point box builds with a lot of different wiring. And technically, these boxes could go through the UL 508A process and be declared compliant. Our other customers just don't require that. But where this came in, it was something that seemed like a good opportunity with this client, but then also for future clients as well.
And one of the things too that is, if something is not in compliance with UL 508A, we can make recommendations to our customer to alter the design slightly or significantly, depending on the complexity of what the issue is, to make it adhere to that UL 508A. And I think there were a couple of examples with this particular customer and this particular product line where the fundamental design was fine, but there were little tweaks that needed to be made so that we could certify the product to the UL 508A. So we can evaluate a product to see that it is or is not UL 508A compliant. And if it's not compliant, we can make recommendations to get it to hit that threshold. So what's unique about this particular customer and this particular product line is typically with our customers, we build one product and it has a manufacturing process. With this particular customer, each product has shared components within it. So what was the most challenging here is you had to very carefully coordinate your component allocation. So without going into too much detail, shippable product, there's probably 4 or 5 different items that all consume the same material with the exception of a couple of pieces of material. So effectively, we had to set up our production schedule and our material delivery schedule for 5x the demand to be able to satisfy every product. So it was a bit of a challenge to have to set that up just because it was new in our system for how we would do that. Once we got it set up and we could allocate all of the material to all of the products, it goes pretty smoothly. But that was the biggest leap for us, was getting that process put in place. There's a lot of volume here, and there's a lot of variations on a theme to that volume. So we're not building 5, 10, or 100 of something, even many hundreds of something, which is kind of our typical manufacturing annual volume. We're building thousands of this thing continuously, all very much the same, but just with little tweaks at the end. So it was very important in those volumes to set up the manufacturing process to achieve as many efficiencies as we could, because literally every little minute, second of assembly time and test time mattered. Because these are such high volume things and frankly low dollar things. So Ben and I worked a lot to really work on the manufacturing efficiencies. So once we set up our system for all the products that we needed to build over a 12 or 14-month schedule, we started making these little sub-assemblies, things that we would never normally treat as a sub-assembly. Something as simple as putting a tube onto a barb fitting, and that was the sub-assembly. But by doing those little sub-assemblies, when you have to make 3,000 or 4,000 of them, it makes it much simpler for somebody to set up once and make all of them at once. And then we've got that total inventory for the rest of the order. Effectively, what we build is a circuit board inside of an enclosure, and then we plug that enclosure in, and we have an automated program where we just effectively say go, and it tests everything it needs to test. It connects to the IoT, and then runs through a bunch of calibration and configuration checks, and then at the end it gives you either a pass or fail criteria. So that's very automated. It doesn't require a test technician to sit there and actively be working on something.
Yeah, I think going back quickly to the 508A, the benefit of the 508A panel is that we're assessing the design at the highest level. So when you have these variants across control panels, technically you treat them very separately, but it allows flexibility to be able to assess each variant and then approve of that design. Whereas if it was a UL certified device, you're a lot more constrained in that way, as far as like changing components and moving things around and changing your wiring. When you have the 508A, you can analyze each variant separately and ensure it conforms and label it, and you're all set. So I think it was a good choice to go with that certification when you think about all the variants of this product.
Yeah, that's effectively what it is. If you imagine, like I said, I think there's 5 products at the top that are all variations on a theme. And just for round numbers, if we say there's 100 components in each one of those boxes, 97 of them are the exact same component. It's those last 3 that differentiate each product. So there might be one more of this module and one less of this module, one antenna, one non-antenna, whatever it may be, but it's just those last couple of pieces. So what that allows us to do is keep everything from a manufacturing process, keep everything as generic as possible for as long as possible, so that when our customer calls us and says, okay, I need 17 of this variant and 23 of that variant, it's very quick for us to turn that around because we're only adding those differentiator components. So to your point about the common core, yeah, that's exactly how we set it all up. We looked at all of the products and said, okay, what's common here? Let's build the product up to that common denominator, and then we'll differentiate from there based on whatever the monthly release delivery schedule is.
The control panels consist of a few different modules that are already certified by our customer. So they got the modules UL certified. So we build those and we make sure that we are adhering to all the standards and the critical materials within these modules. But I think it always was the intent to take these modules and either ship them directly to the end user, who would then put them into their own system. But that quickly translated into us building pre-made control panels that they can just bolt to the side of their air system with their air filter. So I think that was pretty early on. I know that our client was selling just the certified UL modules that measure that connect to the internet, that measure the pressure. But I think it quickly turned into industrial control panels rather than just selling the individual modules.
Yeah, what was important about the certification of the individual modules is when you get to the panel aspect, for anything that would be considered critical or controlled, you have the obligation to build your panel out of certified components. And so for the components that are of the design of our client, those components as building blocks got their own certification, because when it gets to the level of the UL 508A, you have an obligation in the 508A to place onto your panel either listed, certified listed, or recognized components. And when it comes to special application components that are the design of our client, these were components that were independently certified and listed, and then they're combined with catalog off-the-shelf components that also have to ultimately yield a panel that can be certified as at the level of the panel.
Yeah, it's ongoing. So we're getting towards the end of a 14-month delivery schedule. So we started, we started with the initial product line, 5 or 6 years ago at this point. But over time, it's evolved into this greater product line, and we're in the middle of building that right now. So we've got, I think we've got 4 or 5 more months left on this order to deliver against monthly releases. And we're actually in the process right now of getting another, I think, 15-month order in place to go into the end of 2026 and into 2027.
Regarding the UL 508A program, it's unique in that it is the only example where we are trained to do the assessment, and we get to do the product assessment instead of the regulatory body. So the typical model is that you submit your product to the regulatory body. The regulatory body decides if the product is compliant or not, and then what you must do to keep it a compliant product in terms of how you must build it. And then the regulatory body then proceeds to monitor on a quarterly or a twice-a-year basis that you're actually holding up the conditions of construction and the conditions of manufacture. What's unique about the 508A program is that we, as certified individuals, are making those judgments that the regulatory body would otherwise make. And the regulatory body is still arriving quarterly, providing surveillance on what we're doing. But in the case of the 508A, they're exercising surveillance on how we are acting as compliance inspectors. They're checking in on that we are doing the appropriate job in how we're implementing and how we're interpreting the UL 508A. It's unique in that we own that certification, and we can apply that certification to any customer's product. There is a certification that goes specifically with that module and with that client as the owner of the certification and the owner of the intellectual property. But we own our UL 508A program. We can apply it to anything that is in the scope of 508A, which is basically either open or enclosed industrial control panels. And it could be the control panels of this client, and it could be the control panel of another client. Now, at the same time, we still have our business model, and we still have what we're strong at, and we're going to apply the 508A to product that's made in at least medium volume,